Stonyhurst was a school that awarded scholarships to religious boys who might eventually become priests. They had great hopes of Doyle. But, as Doyle said later, it was here that he started to require evidence for his faith. Bread and wine to him was just bread and wine. Surprisingly, the school conspired to let him serve communion without taking it. They knew that even if he'd rejected their version of it, he was still very serious about religion.
The boys here at Stonyhurst are grouped according to years, and the names of those years, figures, elements, syntax, and so on, are derived from medieval rhetoric. There's a case to be made for saying that Holmes's logic derives as much from the scholasticism of Aquinas as it does from the scientific spirit of some 19th century thinking machine. As late as 1907, Doyle tells us that one of the volumes in his collection is The Jesuits in Canada. This school made an indelible impression on him.
Oh, a very strong influence. And I think that can be demonstrated by his most famous story, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Remember that Stonyhurst is one of the most isolated schools in the country. And the story of Baskerville Hall is the story of a house in isolation in the West Country. But think of Stonyhurst, utterly remote, shrouded by mist and rain in the winter. And at the period when he was here, we had some men called the Gentlemen Philosophers, who were young men who came here to sit the university examinations of London University.
Which they weren't allowed at that point to go for Oxford and Cambridge because of the legislation.
No, they were prohibited from doing so, and they could keep their dogs and horses here. Well, the dogs were kept in kennels over the way next to the mill, and they were...
Where was that, over back in the...
That was over beyond the chapel, over there. And it meant that if you were sleeping in the school at night, you'd hear the dogs baying.
So what do you think his Catholicism and his time at Stonyhurst gave him in the creation of Sherlock Holmes? Do you think there's a relation between the two?
Well, strangely enough, it gave him Moriarty.
But he's an arch villain, he's the devil.
Yes. In fact, for the two Moriartys, one, the famous one who became Justice Darland, he was I think he was just above or just below Doyle.
Oh, there was a boy called Moriarty in
the
school?
There were two, yes. In fact, now, this is unfortunate. We have a photograph in which Moriarty occurs, but only the name's on the back. So we can't tell out of which of these boys was Moriarty. But there was a Moriarty.
Stonyhurst was a very exceptional school in that you didn't really get much holidays, did you?
No, he got very little. He got 6 weeks at Christmas. And there is fair evidence that was on the request of his mother.
She wanted him kept here.
Yeah.
She didn't want him at home.
No.
A bit of a mystery.
No, she didn't want him with his father.
Doyle's father, Charles, was an artist and designer with a feeling for fantasy. This is the fountain he designed for Queen Victoria at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. It's an important commission and should have been the beginning of a successful career. But Charles Altamount Doyle threw it all away. One of the things he didn't give his son was an easy, secure childhood.
He started out life here at Sheens Hill Place in Edinburgh, number 3, top floor flat. One of 10 children, only 7 of whom reached maturity. Charles Doyle was alcoholic, epileptic, and as far as we can tell, occasionally violent. There's no mention of this in Doyle's autobiography, but the stories are full of it. When Holmes deduces that Watson's brother died of drink, the normally imperturbable Watson is violently angry.
This is unworthy of you, Holmes. I could not have believed that you would descend to this. You have made inquiries into the history of my unfortunate brother, and you now pretend to deduce from this knowledge in some fanciful way. You cannot expect me to believe you have read this from an old watch. It is unkind, and to speak plainly, has a touch of charlatanism in it.
Holmes's keenness on the Victorian equivalent of the martial arts, from single-stick fighting through something called Baritsu wrestling, on which Sherlockians have written monographs, comes, like the haunting images of drunkenness and violence, not from the pages of a penny dreadful, but from the author's own experience. He grew up in a rough neighbourhood. In that yard there, Doyle blackened the eye of Eddie Tulloch, a neighbour's boy. The boy who lived here already knew too much about violence.
You know, Watson, you look at these scattered houses and you are impressed by their beauty. I look at them, and the only thought which comes to me is a feeling of their isolation and of the impunity with which crime may be committed there.
Good heavens! Who would associate crime with these dear old homesteads?
They always fill me with a certain horror. It is my belief, Watson, founded upon my experience, that the lowest and vilest alleys in London do not present a more dreadful record of sin than does the smiling and beautiful countryside.
That's classic Sherlock Holmes, prose with the flourish of Dracula's cape, dangerously and satisfyingly close to self-parody. It comes from a story called The Copper Beeches, the plot of which was suggested to Doyle by his mother. It's a weird piece about a young woman who's paid money by a sinister couple simply to have her hair styled in a certain way and to sit in a window for a specified period of each day. But the authentic atmosphere of evil in the story almost certainly comes from Mary Doyle's own tragic marriage.
This is where the family moved after that rather down-at-heel flat in Sheenshill Place, going up in the world. But it wasn't as simple as that. Around this time, Charles Doyle, Arthur's father, was committed to an asylum for the insane. As far as we know, 2 people were involved in the decision to put him there. One of them was Conan Doyle. The other, a mysterious individual called Brian Charles Waller. He was the man who paid the rent on this house in George Square, Edinburgh. The face of the house is smiling, respectable. But the story behind it suggests horrors of which Sherlock Holmes' creator never spoke. Charles Doyle's committal remained a well-guarded secret until 1978, and until a contemporary scholar detective got to work on him, no one had any idea of the mysterious affair of Brian Charles Waller.